Also a time of change for my family.
The call came at dawn. No warning, no palace briefing. Just 3 words from a royal aide that changed the next decade of the British monarchy. We need William now. Inside Buckingham Palace, a document had been drafted overnight. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't a health statement. It was a power of attorney that hadn't been used in over 70 years. And within the hour, the future king would hold every key to the crown's private empire, while his father watched from a chair he could barely rise from. Make sure to subscribe, because what happened next tore through a family that spent centuries keeping secrets. William arrived in formal dress, believing he'd been summoned for a security briefing. Instead, he found his father standing beside the Lord Chamberlain, the monarchy's most senior operational officer, and a leather portfolio stamped with the royal seal. No pleasantries, no build-up. Charles spoke 4 sentences. His doctors had ordered an immediate reduction in physical duties. The royal estates could not be left in administrative limbo. The Privy Council had been consulted overnight. William was being asked to assume interim operational command. The word interim hung in the air like a lie both men wanted to believe. William didn't ask about the diagnosis. He didn't ask how long. He asked the only question that mattered. Does this mean you can't come back? Charles didn't answer. He slid the portfolio across the desk. Inside were signing authorities for 9 royal residences, access codes to estate financial systems, personnel files for over 400 household staff, and unilateral approval power over a property portfolio valued at nearly £3 billion. The future king had walked in as a son. He'd be walking out as the man running the monarchy, whether he wanted to or not. Camilla wasn't in the room. That wasn't an accident. For weeks, she'd been quietly lobbying senior courtiers, suggesting a co-regency model, a structure where she and William would jointly oversee estate operations while Charles recovered. Advisors called it pragmatic. William's team called it exactly what it was, a power grab dressed as compromise. When the Lord Chamberlain briefed her 3 hours after William had signed, her reaction was surgical. She requested an immediate amendment, not to the legal structure. She knew that fight was lost, but to the implementation. She wanted her household staff exempted from William's review authority. She wanted Clarence House, her official residence, classified as personally managed. The request landed on William's desk by noon. He denied it by 12:15. Camilla didn't call, didn't write. She appeared in person at Kensington Palace that evening, unannounced, and walked past 2 private secretaries directly into William's study. Catherine was there. She didn't leave. "You're making this a hostile takeover," Camilla said. No greeting, no pretense. William's response was colder than anyone expected. "I'm making it accountable." The meeting lasted 11 minutes. No agreement was reached. And when Camilla left, Catherine turned to her husband and said the thing he'd been avoiding. "She's not going to forgive you for this." William looked at the portfolio still sitting on his desk. "I know." What the public didn't see was the bleeding. Within 48 hours, William had frozen 14 ongoing estate projects, including a £7 million restoration of a private royal chapel and a cottage renovation scheme Camilla had personally championed for veteran staff housing. He didn't cancel them. He demanded full financial audits first. The chapel restoration was found to be 40% over budget, with no updated contracts. The cottage scheme had been awarded to a contractor whose director had previously worked in Camilla's private office. Both were suspended indefinitely. A senior household comptroller resigned in protest, releasing a statement that called William's reforms an overreach that disrespects decades of institutional knowledge. The story made the Times by the weekend. Charles read it over breakfast, alone. He didn't call his son. He didn't defend him publicly. He simply set the paper down and stared at a portrait of his mother, who had never faced a transfer of power because she'd never stopped working until the day she died. Catherine found William that night in the nursery, sitting in the dark. "You're not sleeping," she said. "I keep thinking I'm doing exactly what they'll accuse me of," he whispered, "using his illness to take what isn't mine yet." She knelt beside him. "You're doing what he asked you to do. That's not theft, that's trust." But trust, they both knew, doesn't stop guilt. The breaking point came during an estate coordination meeting William had demanded, with all senior household heads. Camilla attended. It was the first time they'd been in the same room since Kensington Palace. William opened with numbers, spending reports, delayed repairs on tenant properties that had been waiting 8 months for funding, while royal use buildings were being repainted on accelerated schedules. He put 2 photographs side by side on the screen. One, a staff cottage with a collapsed roof, uninhabitable for 11 months. 2, new silk wallpaper being installed in a palace drawing room used twice a year. "This," William said, "is what we're fixing." Camilla's voice cut through the silence. "And who decides what gets fixed, William? You? Yes. Based on what? A spreadsheet? You've been managing estates for 5 years. Some of us have been doing this for 20. William didn't flinch. Then you'll understand why I'm prioritizing people over appearances. The room froze. An aide later described the moment as the last time anyone questioned whether William was actually in charge. But Camilla wasn't done. After the meeting, she requested a private 15 minutes with Charles. No staff, no William. What was said remains unconfirmed. But 2 days later, Charles sent a formal memo to the household heads. It was one sentence long. All estate operational matters are to be directed to the Prince of Wales until further notice. It was the closest thing to a public endorsement William would ever get from his father, and it came at the cost of the one relationship Charles had fought his entire life to protect. For 3 weeks, William and his father didn't speak, not because of anger, because neither knew what to say. William sent weekly written updates. Charles read them, signed where required, and sent them back through aides. The system worked. The estate stabilised, the media moved on, but the family was splintering in slow motion. Catherine tried twice to broker a private dinner. Charles declined both times, citing fatigue. Camilla stopped appearing at joint engagements. And William kept working, reviewing contracts, auditing spend, meeting with tenant representatives, and doing something no senior royal had done in decades. He visited the estate staff housing in person, unannounced. He walked through the cottage with the collapsed roof, spoke to the family who'd been waiting almost a year for repairs, took photos, promised a fix within 30 days. The story leaked, not through the palace, through the family itself, who posted a thank you on social media that went viral in 6 hours. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. William wasn't the overeager heir dismantling his father's legacy. He was the only one willing to fix what had been ignored. The palace didn't comment. But Charles saw the coverage. And that night, for the first time in weeks, he asked an aide to arrange a call with his son. They met in a room at Windsor Castle that's rarely used anymore, a small, oak-panelled study that once belonged to George VI. No aides, no cameras, just a father and son sitting across from each other with nothing left to perform. Charles spoke first. I didn't realise how much I'd been letting slip. William stayed quiet. The double approval at Sandringham, the contractors your team flagged. I thought I was managing, but I wasn't, was I? You were trying to. And you stopped me. William met his father's eyes. I had to. Charles nodded slowly. Then came the thing William had been dreading. I'm not getting better. The future king's breath caught. They didn't tell me that. Because I didn't let them. Silence settled between them. Not hostile, but heavy with the weight of a truth neither had wanted to face. Charles leaned forward. You're not taking anything from me, William. I'm giving it to you. Because if I don't, this all falls apart the moment I can't show up. And I won't let that happen. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object. His signet ring. The one he'd worn since the day he became Prince of Wales. He didn't hand it over. He set it on the table between them. I'm not gone yet, but when I am, you'll be ready. Because you already are. William stared at the ring. I don't want to be ready. I know. Charles stood, slower than he used to. He rested a hand briefly on his son's shoulder. Neither did I. And then he left the room, leaving the ring where it was. William sat there alone for 20 minutes. When he finally stood to leave, he didn't take the ring. But he knew, someday soon, he would. The announcement came 3 weeks later. Not a health update, a structural one. His Majesty the King has appointed the Prince of Wales as Principal Deputy across estate and household governance matters, effective immediately. The title was new. The power wasn't. It formalised everything William had already been doing, but now it carried the King's name, his approval, his blessing. The press called it historic. Constitutional experts called it unprecedented in modern monarchy. Royal commentators debated whether it was a transition or a quiet abdication. But inside the family, it was something else entirely. It was surrender and relief and grief, all at once. Camilla released a statement supporting the decision. It was professional, polite, and carefully devoid of enthusiasm. Behind closed doors, she'd negotiated one concession. Her household staff would remain under her direct management, but their budget would still require William's quarterly approval. It wasn't the compromise she'd wanted, but it was the dignity she needed. Catherine watched her husband that night as he read through the congratulatory messages from officials, dignitaries, and household staff he'd never met. You okay? She asked. He closed the folder. I just became the second most powerful person in the country, and all I feel is tired. She took his hand. That's how you know you're doing it right. 6 months later, the cottage with the collapsed roof was fully restored. The family who lived there sent William a handwritten card. He kept it on his desk. The royal chapel restoration was retendered, brought in 18% under the original budget, and completed ahead of schedule. 12 staff housing units that had been waiting years for funding were greenlit in a single quarterly review. And the household comptroller who'd resigned? He quietly applied to return. His application was declined. Charles began appearing at fewer public events. Not because he was forced to step back, but because he no longer had to prove he could still stand. William took on more. Not because he wanted the spotlight, but because the work was there and no one else was going to do it. Camilla remained Queen Consultant in title and function. But the palace ran on William's signature now. Everyone knew it, even her. At a private family dinner, one of the few they still managed, Charles raised a glass. To duty, he said quietly. William raised his own. To family. Their eyes met across the table, and for the first time in months, there was no tension, no resentment. Just two men who'd both sacrificed something they'd never get back, and survived it. The crown didn't pass that day. It didn't need to. Because power doesn't wait for ceremony. It moves in contracts, in budgets, in decisions made at dawn by people too tired to stop. William didn't take the throne, but he learned how to carry it. He'll already be living it. If this story showed you a side of the royals you've never seen, hit that like button and subscribe, because the next chapter is already being written. And trust me, you won't want to miss it.